Good evening, everyone. It is your girl, Marcie Thomas, and I am excited to be here with you again for another episode of Live Well Sister. So please come on in the room. Go ahead and start sharing this video out to those who may want to learn some more about our history with the climate as people from the African diaspora and places around the world. So you might think that this doesn't apply to you, but trust and believe. Once we get into this conversation, you are going to find out that it does. So I'm coming to you from the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia, by way of Cleveland, Ohio, and a whole bunch of places in between. So if you don't mind dropping us a line to let us know where you're joining us from, it would be wonderful to know who all is in the room. So tonight we are going to be talking about a very special book that hasn't been out in the world that long, but trust and believe it's one you're going to want to get a hold of. And it's called Dark Laboratory on Columbus, the Caribbean, and the Origins of the Climate Crisis. So I know that sounds deep, and it sounds deep because it is deep, okay? But I'm so excited to have our guest with us, the author of this book, Tao Leigh Goffe, who is a London-born Black British award-winning writer, theorist, and interdisciplinary artist who grew up between the UK and New York. Her research explores Black diasporic intellectual histories and political and ecological life. She is a member of New Inc., the New Museum's incubator for art and technology in New York City. And she studied English literature at Princeton University before pursuing a PhD at Yale University and is currently an associate professor at Hunter College City University of New York. She has held academic positions and fellowships at Leiden University in the Netherlands and Princeton University in New York. And as I mentioned, she is an interdisciplinary artist. So she also DJs, is a filmmaker, and she does all the things. So I can't wait for us to dive into this conversation here. So let's go ahead and welcome Tao to the stage. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you, Marcie. Hi, everyone out there. It is such a pleasure to be here.
Yes, and we have Laura chiming in from DC. Hello, hello, hello. So, yes, let's start to get into it. So, first of all, I just really want to congratulate you on putting Dark Laboratory out into the world. So, how is that feeling?
I think I'm still on cloud nine. The launch was incredible. It was with Natalie Diaz, a Mojave Mexican-American poet who really just welcomed us by, putting the frame around this question of Black and Indigenous feminisms and etymologies, poetry, front and center. So I just feel so honored. I feel honored to be here with you. And just, it's amazing the network, the ways that you're connecting people across space and time with Brown Girl Collective. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And you've got a lot going on, work and personally. So thank you for taking the time out to be with us and to have this great conversation. And as I mentioned at the top, sometimes people might hear about climate and all that kind of stuff, and they might not automatically think that it really matters. But as I know, as you know, and as you dive into Dark Laboratory, you're going to find out it does matter. It definitely does. So what was it that led you to, well, Dark Laboratory isn't just the name of your book, it's also the name of an organization that you started. So what is it that led you into the space of really wanting to have these conversations about, climate and about how it affects the Caribbean and, people across the diaspora, as well as Chinese heritage as well? What was it that led you into this work?
Um, I guess it was the different characters of the book. I tell the climate crisis story through coral reefs, looking at the Middle Passage. I tell the story through volcanoes, also through mongooses, sugarcane. So I look to the non-human world and to ecologies to narrate this climate crisis, and I look over deep time to try to understand what it is that they have witnessed. So I really put forth this idea of Black geological time
Yes.
and try to understand our experience in the Americas, not being indigenous to the Americas. I mean, there are people who are Black and Native, but for me, as someone who is not of Native heritage, I was trying to understand what it meant for me to be in the United States and
Right.
to reckon with this American legacy, but to know that like I've been here before in a certain kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
If we think about the transatlantic trade of enslaved Africans, and if we just think about like the lullabies that could not be stolen in terms of colonialism, the recipes, the things that we know without having been told them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the book came together as a record of this and a record of my practice. And out of founding the lab, as you
Yeah.
mentioned, is an actual lab space at Hunter College, where I'm a professor of Black Studies. And we're located on the 16th floor of this building at 68th and Lexington. So we have this incredible view of the Manhattan skyline. And I just constantly want my students to think about Lenape and the native territories that are unceded, as well
Mm-hmm.
as the auction block in terms of the enslavement of Africans going back to the 1600s in a place like New York, because we don't often hear these stories. And it's often been Black and Native peoples who've been the protectors of the climate. So I wanted to understand more and share that story told through an ecological perspective.
Yes, and you do such a good job. As I said, this book is deep. The concepts are deep. I learned so much. I mean, just about human nature, about ecology, about history. I mean, it's just so much that's involved in this 300 pages that you have here of information. But I really could appreciate it because this book is forcing me, or has forced me, to just look at some things from a different perspective, because it's so
Mm.
easy to whitewash, for lack
Mhm,
of a better
mhm.
word, what it means to think about the ecology, or what it means to think about what's happening, marine science, or
Yeah.
all these different things. It's so easy to not really see where we, or people from the diaspora, fit into
Mhm.
it. That's what
Yeah.
really has enlightened me in reading this book, and just our ties to the land. I mean, because we can really start there, because
Mhm.
in this generation, there's so many of us who don't necessarily have those ties. But when
Yeah.
we look historically, that's all we had was the land.
And you mentioned being on the outskirts of Atlanta, and I know a lot of people in the South talk about the red earth. And
Mhm.
if we go back in geological time, it's thought in terms of Pangea that West Africa and what would be the southeastern US would have been connected in a certain way. So I
Mhm.
wanted to try to understand what it is about a kind of African agrarian tradition is actually in the soil, because we have cultivated this country, these lands,
Mhm.
these islands, from the South Sea Islands to yeah, Jamaica, where my mother was born. And I think that we have a sense of responsibility to the land. And listening to Maroon folks in Jamaica, it really just taught me that the land is a pact, and we need to remember that it's our duty to protect the land as it has protected us for generations.
It definitely has. It definitely has. Now, the Dark Laboratory is the main theme, or the main the name of the book, but on Columbus, the Caribbean, and the origins of the climate crisis. So, in this book, you help to continue to dispel many of the myths that people have about Columbus. We know, in more recent days, yeah, there's still a Columbus Day, but a lot of people are kind of getting away from honoring that or celebrating that. But
Mhm.
you really dive into what it is that he came to this side of the world to do, and how the work or the things that he was doing started this whole thing of throwing things off kilter to begin with. So just share a little bit
Mhm.
about that, because of course everybody knows now. Of course, this isn't fiction, so it's not a spoiler type book, but you do need to read it. We're not going to tell you everything, so but just give us a little
Yeah.
bit about that.
We won't tell you everything, but I am blaming Columbus for the origin of this crisis. I talk about it being an Italian mistake that led to this whole drama.
Mm-hmm.
Which is to say that it was not inevitable that we should be here. It was an accident for him. He sailed the wrong way. He sailed south instead of west, exactly as he intended to do. So he
Mm-hmm.
thought he was going to China. He names the people he encounters as Indians, and this land becomes known as the Indies because he was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And it was his choice to belittle these people, to try to enslave these people, to take them back to Spain. He didn't have to do all of these things.
Right.
But I really pinpoint on the fact that in 1493, so the following year when he went to Spain and then came back, he brought with him sugarcane.
Right.
And especially for Black and Brown peoples, for people of color, sugarcane is a bittersweet legacy and
Mm-hmm.
story. So I wanted to think about, what if he hadn't brought sugarcane, which happens to be
Mm-hmm.
indigenous to India, to the Caribbean? Because he didn't even land on the United States, the
Mm-hmm.
mainland. He actually was in what's the Bahamas today.
Right.
So to think about those islands, to think about the plantation economy, um, we have to understand it as a violence against the soil and a violence
Yes.
against people. So everything that we do at Dark Lab is about the crossroads of stolen land and stolen life. And yeah, it's really an honor to be able to encourage people to listen to the soil and to tell that story, because monocrop agriculture has really exhausted the soil,
Mm-hmm.
such that even when we're eating foods, produce, it may not be as nutrient rich. And I think a lot
Right.
of people I know feel that too in the US. Like, it's just not as nutritious. And it
Right.
is because the soil has been exhausted for centuries in this way. So had Columbus not, brought sugarcane, who knows what else could have happened. And the plantation required deforestation. So
Mm-hmm.
these islands and on the east coast of the US, it was plentiful woodlands that were there, and they were raised to
Mm-hmm.
create these pastoral farmlands. But all of it is so artificial, let alone the violence that our ancestors were forced to undergo, being forcibly, taken here to cultivate, and yet we managed to survive in spite of
Yes.
all of that. So I'm really led by a thinker like Toni Morrison and her book Playing in the Dark. And she was a teacher of mine, a professor of mine, that yeah, this lab wouldn't exist without her
Wow.
her guidance. Um, and the way that in Sula she writes about black Black women and Black womanness as
Mm-hmm.
inventing choice out of choicelessness. And
Yes,
wherever I meet Black women in the world, I think that's what we're always doing. We
absolutely.
have to.
You have to. Inventing choice out of choicelessness. That's one y'all need to write down if you weren't familiar with it already, because that is the way in which we live, in which we have to pivot and figure things out oftentimes, especially when things are thrown at us that we weren't anticipating. And if we're
Hmm.
thinking of these people on these in these lands that would have been indigenous to them,
Hmm.
they had a way of thinking and doing and being. And I love in the book you talk about, and you've already mentioned them, the Maroons and other people who were indigenous to these lands, who knew what to do with the land. They knew how to survive and thrive with the plants that were there, or
Yeah.
if they were coastal, to be able to get things from the ocean, from the sea, to be able to eat and nourish themselves. They knew all of these things.
Hmm. Exactly. And the Underground Railroad was also coastal. It was in the sea. It was from Mexico, I've learned, to the Bahamas and
Mm-hmm.
beyond because of this inventiveness, because they had to get free. And
Right.
they were learning from, yeah, indigenous peoples who've been here for thousands of years. And there's also obviously people who are both Black and indigenous. So
Right.
it's these shared bloodlines and really just like clandestine ways of finding freedom together.
Mm-hmm. Finding freedom together. Ooh, that's a word right there, because we have to continue to do that even in 2025 and beyond. Figure out how we're going to find freedom together. So thank you for that, Tao, because yeah, that is something right there, just to think about that. But
Mm.
as you mentioned, the monocrop system of just
Mhm.
saying, okay, I'm going to put sugarcane here, or we're going to grow, like I have family. My mom still lives in Southeast Georgia, which is not that far from the islands. And thinking, depending on where you were there, it was either rice farming or it was cotton in other areas. I drive through South Georgia and I see where the cotton bowls and things like that are still there.
Oh,
But how doing that did destroy the land.
yeah, exactly. And I think that it's interesting you mentioned cotton because they have this tree called a cotton tree in
Mm-hmm.
Jamaica, and it's also known as like a duppy tree. So
Mm-hmm.
it's actually really powerful, and it's
Mm-hmm.
believed that spirits or there are these different presences, like sacred presences at the root of the tree. So even though we have this violent monocrop agriculture
Right.
of the plantation, there's also wildlife that's growing in a way that can't be controlled. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that our ancestors were able to continue their religious traditions
Mm-hmm.
alongside Christianity, but also maintaining an African sense of um, yeah, what it means to inherit the land and to respect nature in a way that is not looking down on nature. Whereas I think the European way, the American way, is to have everything be so separate. So yeah, I feel like there's a certain kind of power when we look to these our relationship to these different crops like cotton or rice, and that we can think about, yes, there's violence there, but also we've been nourished in different ways. Again, that our ancestors were inventing um, cures and healing amidst the trauma that existed too.
That is so true, because something, even before reading this book, I've really been thinking about is, how do we start to tap into some of that traditional knowledge that we had, of
Hmm.
understanding
Yeah.
that there are plants that have medicinal, qualities and all these sorts of things, and how can we start to look more at that and lean into it. And I mean, let's be honest, especially in this specific time when so many things are changing and shifting, we have to like be more innovative and inventive in figuring out ways to make sure that we're caring for ourselves, caring for our families, and for future generations as well. So Dark Laboratory really helps a person to think about that. How can we do these things, or how did our ancestors do these things as well?
Yeah, for sure. And that's why I have so much optimism, because I think that there's just so many traditions across the world that
Mhm.
have been discredited by the Western European tradition.
Mhm.
And if we were to welcome all of that science, Black science, African, Indigenous, Asian sciences, medicine, like Chinese medicine, into the equation, then we would have so much more knowledge, so many more possible climate solutions. And I do
Mhm.
believe that those future technologies are waiting to be invented, drawing on a kind of ancestral knowledge. So
Yes.
at the lab, I fundraise to try
Yes.
to make that possible.
Mhm.
It's a lot of hard work, but I'm just so inspired by people I see out there across the world doing this.
Mhm.
But it makes me think that there is salvation that is possible. There is a kind of climate redemption, but only if we're willing to identify the problem, and only if we're willing to look at the origin. Like, if we can't even agree that it began in 1492,
Mm.
then like, what are we really trying to fix that we wouldn't just do again? Like, do we
Right.
deserve a solution if we're not gonna contend with how slavery was an original sin and the
Yes.
particular form of chattel slavery? A lot of environmentalists think that they can, you know, just solve the climate crisis without addressing race. Um, but it's just simply not true. And it was a certain moment in 2020, tragically, with the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor,
Mhm.
where this call to understand, like, what it means to say that I can't breathe,
Mhm.
that was so powerful and continues to be, because it's about the air that we're all breathing.
Air
It
quality.
involves all of us, no
Mm.
matter what our racial background is. And how do we just think about the process of respiration? How do we think about environmental racism, and who is, yeah, suffering, who is subject to premature death? And yeah, there's a lot of work to do, but I think we have to be able to talk about race in order to do it. And yet, we are currently in Trump 2.0,
Mhm.
where
Mhm.
anti-DEI, etc.,
Yes.
and it makes it such that we're not even going to be able to have the language to speak about these problems because we're being censored. So it's important that we say Black, that we say brown, that we talk about race, and that we don't
Right.
just pretend it doesn't exist,
Right.
even if it is a social construct.
That's true. It is a social construct. And, as it's interesting, as much as we're not supposed to talk about it, there's a whole lot of talk about it. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
right?
Because if there wasn't
Yeah,
quote unquote talk about it, there wouldn't be a need to start trying to do away with programs and things like that. We could just let things
exactly.
ride as they've been and continue to, operate in a way that's giving everyone opportunities. I mean, because
Hmm.
well, that's a whole nother conversation. But I mean,
Yeah,
we know that people would still find ways to make race,
yeah.
an issue anyway. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting time that we're in, and just figuring all of that out. But I love the fact that you're saying we do need to talk about it, because
Hmm.
just like historically, we know that it was Black people and Chinese people, because in the book you talk about that as well,
Hmm.
specifically centering around Jamaica and things that were happening there. But
Hmm.
it wasn't just Black people or African people. There were, I guess, other folks that white supremacists thought were quote unquote less than or a little more expendable,
Yeah,
that
exactly.
were
Expendable.
asked to do these things, tilling the land and tending to the crops and things like that. So please talk a little bit about the Chinese factor as well, because I'm sure many people may not even know about that.
Sure. I mean, my name is Tao. I have this
Yes.
like necklace with the Chinese
Mhm.
character Tao, or Dao, which, yeah, it comes from the Tao Te Ching. So I guess my parents were really interested in Chinese philosophy and they were thinking about their Chinese heritage. So it's an inheritance, to think about these Afro-Asian worlds. Like you said, it is a story that includes the Chinese, also South Asians,
Mm-hmm.
also Middle Eastern people. I touch a bit
Mm-hmm.
on Palestine in the book and its diaspora in the Caribbean. So, yeah, we get all of these different people from across the globe brought to the Caribbean, and there's a rich history, a labor history. And part of what I'm trying to say in the book is that every labor history is a climate history.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we have in the 19th century the emancipation of the enslavement of Africans, and this leads to a labor vacuum because now all of the white plantation owners are thinking, who is going to cultivate the sugarcane?
Mm-hmm.
So they come up with the plan. And when I say they, it's the Dutch, the Danish, the British, the Spanish, the French. They all decide, okay, we're going to go to Asia and
Mm-hmm.
replace enslaved labor with indentured labor.
Mm-hmm.
So they inaugurate this whole debt economy that was technically voluntary, but we know that it really was not in terms of people
Mm-hmm.
being hoodwinked and tricked and kidnapped into the system, again, to cultivate sugarcane, but also to further subdue emancipated African people
Mm-hmm.
such that um, they would keep the wages very low. And yeah, the mutilation of the whip is what was suffered by these various people in terms of plantation life. This happened in Louisiana,
Mm-hmm.
Brazil, really across the hemisphere. So my book is about really bringing that history to light
Yes.
and really looking at the plantation system, also looking at mining and the way that people of color have been exploited, but even more importantly, the ways that they always consistently uprose, that they
Mm-hmm.
rebelled. So in chapter 5 on guano, we hear these anti colonial echoes and rebellions from African Americans in Maryland who were forced to Haiti to mine guano, to Hawaii, where you have indigenous Polynesian laborers who also started rebellions against their white overseers. And then we see this with 100,000 Chinese laborers in Peru
Mm-hmm.
who also rose up. Some of them took their own lives because the conditions were so brutal. So I just wanted to sit with the fact of that event, which were not taught in
Mm-hmm.
school.
Not at all. We're not taught that at all. But I love that in the midst of all this going on, there is survival. There
Mhm.
was rebellion, in the midst of
Yes.
it. I know there is a point where you talk about like the Maroons and other people who live quote unquote maybe off the grid a little bit. They kind of went off
Mhm.
and did their own thing in their own communities.
Yeah.
So just tell us a little bit about it because some of us may have heard of Maroons before, but don't really even know what Maroons do or did.
And maybe that's part of their design
Yeah,
that they keep it a secret, and that's how you stay free by being
right,
off the grid, by not being on Twitter or
right.
letting people know where you are, by like going dark, quote unquote. And yeah, we have maroon societies across the hemisphere. So from the Great Dismal Swamp in Virginia, really just across the Western Hemisphere to Brazil. I visited with Maroons in Jamaica
Mm-hmm.
and was just able to learn so much about sovereignty,
Mm-hmm.
Afro-Indigenous sovereignty, because they formed coalitions with Amerindian people. They have shared bloodlines and really were just able to maintain their religions, these different rituals, jerk chicken
Yes.
is a dish that comes from from their warfare. So they would cook under the ground based on indigenous gastronomy, but also African techniques. And then we get this delicious cuisine, which you will
Mm-hmm.
find in Martinique, but also in Jamaica and really across the island chain of the Caribbean. So somehow they were able to communicate with each other.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the same goes for native peoples of South America and
Mm-hmm.
Central and Latin America. There's more, I guess, to be said about staying off of that bureaucratic colonial map and
Yes.
the safety that it provides. Because if you can't be found, then you can't be colonized in a way. And
Mm-hmm.
that gives me hope, even though, yeah, it was not the fate of the majority. The fact
Right.
that it was possible, I think there's just so many lessons we could learn about, yeah, what it means to actually be independent and to be sovereign,
Mm-hmm.
um, instead of letting the colonizer like pit us against one another.
Mm-hmm. And that's ultimately, colonization is a big thing, as well as just being able to control everything financially,
Hmm.
taking
Yeah,
over, and that's really what it
yeah,
was all about, all these crops. It wasn't because people just wanted to be farmers or own land and things like that.
no,
It was all ultimately about the
yeah.
money at the end of the day.
And Maroons have their own banks, they have their own currency. So, to your point about the financial system, maybe it's part of what is needed too.
Mm-hmm. Just to figure it out and to make that work. But when you
Mhm.
think about it, I'm just looking at the cover of this book, like you see the
Yeah.
smokestack and all of those
Yes.
things. But it's just like, we think of what would have been happening, during times of, enslavement, when we were more of our agriculture societies and things like
Mhm.
that. And then like a shift into more industrialism, and how
Yeah.
that has impacted our climate as well.
Yeah, and I the cover was designed by Oliver Monday at
Okay.
Doubleday, and I was really glad to have some input because,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the smokestack that we see
Mm-hmm.
here, it represents the Industrial Revolution, and I think
Mm-hmm.
many people would pinpoint the start of the climate crisis, so the origin, as that time period. They would look to factories and these plumes of smoke. Sure, but what
Right.
about what preceded that? What about the logic? What about the labor of the plantation, the kind of optimization? What about the way that Black people were being treated as if they
Mm-hmm.
were technology, as if they were, I mean, they were powering all of these different systems. So if
Right.
we're not willing to understand what precedes the
Mm-hmm.
factory, then I feel like we're at a loss. So I really just liked the way that he
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
gave
good.
us that symbolically with the palm
Mm-hmm.
tree to speak to the deforestation that was necessary for the
Right.
sugar cane to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And during the Dark Lab summer internship, this was in June a couple years ago, the skies of Brooklyn were this color.
Mm.
The forest fires, which we saw, again, in the Palisades in New Jersey and also in Brooklyn in November, we're seeing these signs, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Nobody is exempt. And it feels kind of like a premonition in a way, sadly. And we think about LA and what's
Right.
been happening there. And
Right.
again, the communities that are most affected, right, are Black and
Right.
Brown people. And when we think about what recovery is going to look like, we
Mm-hmm.
know that it's going to be slower for certain people, if at all.
Right.
So, with the government moving the way that it is, we really just have to think about how we can build systems, emergency systems of care, for ourselves, because
Mm-hmm.
we can't depend on any government actually
Mm-mm.
for that.
Unfortunately, we cannot because, as I was saying momentarily a few moments ago, that it's all about the money and
Hmm.
powers that be. If it's not going to make them any money or make them richer, those sorts of things, there's just a level of care that just doesn't exist. Capitalism is much more important than the human beings that are impacted. But like you say, with the smokestacks and all of these things, think of where a lot of the factories are. You know, think about where a lot of
Hmm.
the dumps are. There's a part in the book where you're
Yeah.
talking about the dumps and where and when they take the stuff and take it off of American soil, where are they taking the trash, the
Hmm.
garbage?
Yeah, to islands. They dumped the trash. There was one barge that I talked about where they tried to really
Mhm.
just take this incinerated trash and these ashes and to dump it in so many different places. It's carcinogenic. It's intended, right, to be dumped on those like a kind of hoodwinking again. Um, and yeah, it's no mistake that we see this on native reservations within the US. We see it in places like North Carolina that I write about. And yeah, the question of environmental racism. So we can look at, I guess, quote unquote, developing countries and these climate impacts, but we can also see it within neighborhoods and where it is that people of color live and where these toxic. So to me, that's all part of the climate justice question. And if we're not
Mhm.
addressing it, then we're really not being ethical.
Mhm. Mhm. Now, on another note, in the book, you do talk about, I mentioned marine biology a little bit ago. So,
Hmm.
you talk about the coral reefs and, what's happening in the ocean and things like that. So, and how that impacts everything and everyone as well. Just give us a little insight into that. Because I learned some things about the coral because I didn't realize it was a living organism. The way
Yeah,
that it is. So tell us a little bit about that. Educate us, Tao.
I didn't know either. Yeah, so coral reefs are the subject of chapter 4 of the book, and it's
Mhm,
called Breathing Underwater.
mhm,
And I really just, in that part, wanted to um, dive deep and really think about, again, Black geologic time. So it's the second part of the book that's called Geologic Time and
mhm,
Black Witness. So
mhm,
I wanted to imagine, since it's the fact that corals are some of the oldest living animals,
mhm,
being thousands of years old, like what is it that they would have seen in terms of the transatlantic trade? How
mhm,
is it that they could have been impediments to those ships?
mhm,
What did it mean when those ships might have crashed into coral and would have sunk? I wanted to sit with Brexia, which is this idea of, um, I guess, imagining Black people who left or were thrown, like found their fate in the Middle Passage in the Atlantic, and that in this imaginary, this idea, they didn't die and
mhm,
their children were born. So some of the people that are imagined in this story are the children of enslaved African women who um, therefore learned to breathe underwater
mhm.
and started this whole magical underwater kingdom
I love
of
it.
Black people, like a Black Atlantis.
Yeah.
So I wanted to think about the corals being animals as part of that ecology.
Hmm. And I mean, it's just so well, one thing. Even though they weren't black, it did make me think of the second Black Panther, just with the whole
Oh
underwater
yeah,
aspect of the
that
second
scene.
Black Panther. It did make me
Yes.
think about that when I read that part of the
Hmm.
book. But it's just, I'll be honest with you, Tal. Like, I'm in Georgia, and for many years I lived close to Savannah. I always would
Hmm.
feel a little something when I be down there on that ocean. When I visit the ocean, because it's like I could feel, I could sense, a
Yeah.
connection to the ancestors being in that space. So you saying that and me reading that in your book is just like, yeah, there's a little something with that, that there are things that we carry in our DNA, we carry in
Hmm.
our memory, even though we might not have even experienced it. So to think of the fact that there would have been people who, either by choice or not, would have landed in that water. And also to think
Hmm.
about, depending on where a person was from, they may have enjoyed, being in the water and swimming and things
Yeah,
like that. Wherein now,
exactly.
we talk about in the book, by and large, a lot of Black people don't swim. So
Hmm. So yeah, I was very glad to learn that there is a centuries long tradition of Black divers from West
mhm,
Africa, from this book called Undercurrents of Power, I believe. And I learned about it from an artist called Andrea Chung. And it was just amazing to know that these European enslavers actually targeted some of the best divers. So in
mhm,
terms of diving for pearls and just different ways of relating to water that are part of a aquatic tradition.
mhm,
So this idea of these people surviving is not that far-fetched in
no,
some respects when we understand, again, inventing choice out of choicelessness
mhm,
and the different strategies that Black people were deploying, and anyone who was subjugated would deploy if they were put in that position. So
mhm,
yeah, I just love that the house music group, a duo called Drexia, was based on this whole idea of this underwater Black world
mhm,
under the sea, and it being just like a space of liberation, of syncopation, of
mhm.
house music. So that chapter just allowed me to be a bit experimental and
Yes.
to really just think about, yeah, the Black Atlantic, which is a book by Paul Gilroy written in 1992, a Black British theorist. And I think it's just exciting to think about what it would mean to listen underwater, to
Mhm.
listen to what the coral have to tell us.
Yes.
The other thing is I write a lot about mountains in the book,
Yes,
and
I
I
was
think it's
going there
there.
next. Yes.
But these are underwater mountains. When you start to think about
Mhm,
it, across space and time, there are underwater volcanoes, and that's how islands are born. So it's
mhm.
all connected, the
It's
land and the sea. So I can see why a place like Savannah would have those echoes.
mhm,
And it's a port city. All of these different port cities of
mhm.
the Atlantic are so connected. Our music is connected for that reason. And I was specifically thinking about a port like Charleston,
Yes.
and yeah, the tragic histories, but also, again, the coral being the constant, being along the coast, and what it is that, yeah, enslaved people would have seen when they were disembarking. And would it
Mhm.
have been familiar? So I wanted to think about someone like Frederick Douglass, who wrote about the sharks during the transatlantic trade and the Middle Passage. So, yeah, the marine world became a space that we were able to explore and then to center Black marine biologists,
Mhm.
and a certain kind of knowledge that, yeah, that is boundless.
I love that. I love that. And then, as you mentioned, talking about the mountains, people will often ask, are you more a beach person or a mountain person? I really am more of a mountain person, honestly.
Oh, me too.
but, but, yeah, but, I love that you talk about that and how just even in terms of many of our great writers and thinkers and, Martin Luther King, the
Hmm.
mountain has come up a lot, whether it's in speeches or in literature or in some of our music, especially some of our
Hmm.
spirituals or Christian music, that the mountain comes up a lot, which is also,
Yeah,
a part of
where
this earth.
exactly, as a kind of metaphor in these different ballads, like there ain't no mountain high enough.
Right.
It's always there, right? And it becomes this kind of idea of moving mountains or like the impossible or the insurmountable. But yeah, I find that there's so much poetry in mountains, and we just have to know where to listen.
Hmm.
Um, so, funnily enough, this book is taking me on a European tour, and we're
Okay.
going to go to the Alps. So,
Wow.
we'll see um, about the mountain songs there. And I think, again, it's universal. There's so
Hmm.
many different mountain songs. I went to Kentucky and I could hear these echoes of country music, which
Right.
is one of the most popular genres in Jamaica. So many
Really?
people just love country music. Yeah.
Wonder how
So
they
I
feel
was just
about
like,
Beyonce, but that's another conversation.
yeah, I wonder. But I wasn't surprised, because like the notorious B.I.G., his mother being one example, she's from Jamaica and she loves country music, a certain
Hmm.
generation, because the radio stations in the US South, so in Tennessee,
Right.
Florida, New Orleans, like they were playing such that the Caribbean being right there, we could
Hmm.
pick up and hear those stations. And
Wow.
that's how reggae was invented, based on hearing that. It was not intended for Jamaica, but Bob Marley heard this and then we got reggae. So I
Okay.
think the mountain songs are really yeah, it gives me hope about a kind of global sound and vision and how we can come together.
I love that. I love that. And tell me about the Alps when you go there.
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
Maybe I'll
Yes.
be I'll be yodeling out there.
You're
Well,
like,
hopefully no. I heard it's avalanche season, so
oh wow, yeah, that
we'll be
might not
careful.
be good. That might not be good. Another
Yeah.
thing to talk about in the book, it's funny. My mom and I were talking about this person not too long ago, because his incident happened right around the same time as George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, who was down there in South Georgia, not too far from where I
Mm.
used to live. And that's Christian Cooper and the whole
Mm.
concept of Black people and their relation to birding and, and that type of relationship. So talk a little bit about that. So I found that interesting.
Thank you, because I feel that chapter, yeah, it really was about Cooper versus Cooper. So the
Mm-hmm.
Central Park bird watching incident, and so many people during the early part of the pandemic turned to bird watching, and I was among them. So just the fact that the murder of George Floyd took place at the same time for me felt important to place together, in the sense that Christian Cooper was able to use his camera to save his life.
Mm-hmm.
So this section on Black witness becomes one that is about life and death in the contemporary moment.
Mm-hmm.
And the camera phone really comes into play, and yeah, it tells us so much about surveillance, tells us a lot about the history of how white women have been believed and listened to. It echoed, obviously, Emmett Till and these other violences, that the fact that he was able to be believed
Mm-hmm.
is just so incredible. The platform that he has established since
Right. Since
then,
mm-hmm.
writing his story, telling it his way, and not letting white supremacy claim that moment is just so powerful. Advocating for bird life, being the president, I think, of the New York City Audubon
Mm-hmm.
Society, which has since been renamed because of Audubon's racism.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So it's just like a very incredible example of someone who yeah, very nearly could have lost his life that day, but really gave the world a lesson in how um, to navigate this with a sense of calm and um, a sense of justice
Mm-hmm.
that also wasn't seeking retribution, though it would have been vindicated. So in that chapter, I really just wanted to think about who's watching who, and
Mm-hmm.
what it means for Black people to, take part in these wildlife and nature hobbies. And is it safe for us?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and also just to look at the invisible branches of the American family tree, that there's the Black Coopers and the White Coopers. So then I
Right.
go into the fact that there's the Black Goffs and there's the White Goffs.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
we seem to understand why that is the case, but for
Mm-hmm.
others, it's like, how could that be? They don't look the
Mm-hmm.
same. It's
Right.
like, how do you think it is the
Right.
case?
Right.
But we only need to look to Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings to answer those questions. And yeah, I found that, yeah, his story is just so powerful, and I'm still continuing just to learn from the example that he set in terms of his TV show on bird watching.
Yes, and I love that because I'm a person that likes to get outside and walk and occasionally hike, not the Alps though, but just I love being outside. Like I mentioned earlier, I am more of a mountain girl than a beach girl because
Hmm.
it's just something about getting out there and going to the highest peak and observing all the nature and all of those things that are around you. But it really speaks to the thing of, I mean, like, yes, of course, we're talking about climate and how the climate is changing and all of these things. We know we're all one big ecosystem together, us, the flora, the fauna, all of us are. But for us as Black people specifically, a lot of times we don't feel safe in those spaces.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see more organizations, talk about that, or come up, whether it's outdoor Afro, or it's another one, Black faces and green spaces. We're
Mm,
starting to see more of that. But books like yours kind of help us to understand that that's always been a part of who we are. I mean, we
yeah.
built a lot of these national parks and things like
Yes.
that. So it belongs to us just like it belongs to anyone else. But
Hmm.
just understanding that these are spaces that we should feel free to go to and enjoy and all of that. So I just love that you included him, because that just really made me think about us being outside just in general.
Yeah. And it was great just seeing that moment of like Black in geosciences, Black in
Mhm.
natural history museums, like all these online communities that came together. They had Black Birders Week. So I've just been so inspired. I was even invited to give a keynote address in DC to
Okay.
geoscientists of color, and I talked all about guano, and it was just amazing. They totally heard the mountain songs.
Hmm.
I talked about Bob Marley and about Appalachia, and it made total sense to them.
Hmm.
So I think that we need to be honoring and talking to Black scientists, scientists of color,
Hmm.
because they are often feeling like the minority in their fields. And it turns out geology is the least diverse of all of the
Hmm.
sciences. So I was just really so pleased to be able to meet all these incredible folks who've been doing this work.
Hmm. Hmm. Yes, and it's very inspiring for those who might think that that they can't get involved in these sorts of things. So it's good to like read books like yours and to hear of folks that are actually actively involved in these spaces. I mentioned Savannah earlier. I want to say Savannah State University has like a marine biology department, and it's a HB,
Mm,
historically Black college and university. So that's a great thing. So people
yeah.
know that we need to be involved, because like we were talking about earlier, historically our people had these ties to the land, and there are things that we can learn and continue to put out into the world, that we've always had the connection,
Hmm.
always. But to be able to have our
Exactly.
voices heard when decisions are being made, or ideas are being formulated. So yeah.
Definitely.
And we have a comment. Yes, we did. We are park rangers as well. Yes, the National Park Services has a really good Black History Month resource. Okay, well, we'll have to look
Amazing.
that up.
Yeah,
Yes,
I want to check that out.
yes. Thank you, Christina. I hope I'm saying that correct. It looks like Christina, but thank you. I thank you because yes, we just need to know because a lot of times we don't know.
Yeah.
And what's available to us out there. Now, of course, in this book, as I told you all at the top, there are like 9 good chapters that are full of all kinds of great information, a wonderful introduction, all of that. You are going to learn so much in Dark Laboratory that we didn't even scratch the surface of here because there just isn't enough time. Plus, you're supposed to buy the book and read it. That's the whole point, right? But with that being said, just in general, Tao, what, if anything, would you like for, well, this is a 2-part question. First part, what is one of the main things that you want people to take away from Dark Laboratory?
I guess I want to come back to the idea of lullabies and even like bedtime stories to think about playing in the dark. So to Toni Morrison's book.
Mm-hmm.
And I want people not to be afraid of the dark, but to actually see that it's like this place that has a lot of potential possibility. I'm a DJ, and I joke that I'm a PhD DJ, being a professor. But
Right.
for me, that practice is about a kind of call and response.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about nightlife, the dance floor, and playing in the dark as part of, yeah, just this immense creativity. So I hope that people will, yeah, interrogate the fact that this idea that the dark is something bad when actually it's a source of power, at least as I have interpreted it. And
Mm-hmm.
there are certain things that need the dark to thrive and to grow. There's a kind of intimacy there. Even if we think about like a dark room, right? And
Mm-hmm.
photography, I just think about the different flowers that bloom at night. So I guess I'm a night owl.
Yes, I
I
am too,
You
except for the
too?
day job that keeps me from being a night owl. But yes, I generally am.
Exactly. So it's like fighting these things, but there are those of us who had to be up at night to protect the tribe at that time in
Mm-hmm.
the cave person times. So
Mm-hmm.
I just feel that yeah, there's just so much that can be alive at night. I used to host as part of Dark Lab a midnight writing circle. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I feel like there's so much creativity. There's so much yet that is not born and is undared. And I just want to encourage people that we can do this together. So they can reach out if they have ideas. I am currently on maternity leave until
Yes.
September.
Oh wow. Okay, that's a good one.
um, so it's just yeah, I'm seeing the long-term vision, but encourage people to reach out with ideas globally because we have a lot of work to do, and our fate in terms of the climate crisis is going to be a shared fate no matter what. So we're in this together, whether we like it or not. So
Mm.
we better just come to the table with some good ideas, and I think that we can find freedom together.
Yes, yes. Well, Jean, I see you have a comment, but I'm not sure. Please let me know what you mean by CCC so we can make sure we answer your question properly. So please share that in the comments and then I will ask that question. But yes, I just in me reading, for me, it's just like in Dark Laboratory, it's just so much to learn and to think about and to consider what our relationship is with the earth and the world around us. Because before we came on, I was saying how in reading this book, it made me think, like you talked about, Columbus and coming in and, him and the ones behind him, colonizers coming in and just really kind of tearing things up and
Mhm.
shifting the atmosphere of all of these
Yeah,
different places. And then I thought, well, wow, they shifted the atmosphere. And then things that would normally happen in that atmosphere continue to happen. But
mhm,
now, whatever protections or things may not have been there before, it makes things worse when something happens.
exactly.
So,
Because
it's
it
just
was an extinction event, and we should
right.
understand it that way.
It's an extension. So just understanding that when you destroy one thing, there are a lot of other things that are going to happen along the way. I'll give you another case, well, two cases in point to
Mhm.
my what I'm talking about. Like I live in the Atlanta area, and I have heard people talk about how they might see deer or just different animals are showing up that they might not have seen before, because when you start tearing down the trees to build new houses,
Mhm.
these animals don't have anywhere to go, so now they're in your backyard.
Wow,
That
yeah.
sort of thing. And that has to do with destroying what was naturally there. Or
Mhm.
recently here in Georgia, there was a lot of snow, and I heard that down in the southern part of the state, the sea turtles were hurt
Mm.
because how they were
Wow.
frozen because it was
Mm.
really cold and it was snowing. So
Oh my gosh.
it's not normal for it to snow
Yeah,
in the deep south. So it's things like
right.
that we might think that it doesn't matter or it's not that big of a deal, but it really is. Okay, thank you for sharing, Sanaka. And we can ask the question. We didn't talk about it, but I can bring it up. It's a civilian conservation corps during the Great Depression. You have any thoughts on that, Tao? Because we didn't talk about it, but
No, I'm not informed on that topic, but I
okay.
would love to learn more. Yeah, I think that the Great Depression is just, again, another moment of resourcefulness and inventing choice out of choicelessness. There were different strategies that our peoples were always devising, but I'd love to do some more research and learn about that.
So yes, Civilian Conservation Corps. That's homework for all of us. Thank you, Jean.
Yeah, thank you.
And Karen, she said that she was the book club she belongs to is reading James. She knows that your book club is as well. Yes.
Amazing. Yeah, Percival
Yes.
Everett, incredible.
Yes, I
And
know
then
a
he
lot of
also has
people.
a book, Dr. No, which also ties into this whole guano world. So yeah,
Mm-hmm,
I'm a big
mm-hmm.
fan.
So yes, and she also says looking forward to reading your book. Great combo. Thank you, Karen. I
Oh, thank you.
appreciate that. I appreciate that. But the second part of the question, and then I'm gonna let you go because I know
Mhm.
you mentioned maternity leave. I didn't say it earlier when I said you got personal stuff, but that
Yeah, my
thing,
dragon baby.
that's the other thing that's happening in your life
Mhm.
right now. Which congratulations, a book
Thank
baby and a baby
you.
baby. So
Yeah,
congratulations.
a creative season for sure.
The creative season. I love it. I love it. So the second part of that question I was going to ask is, of course, there are a lot of different things that we can do just as regular human citizens out here to support what's going on in terms of climate issues or ecological issues or environmental issues. What, if anything, would you suggest that we do to begin to help make things better?
I think that we have to rally together, mutual aid. Obviously, we look at the incredible response in terms of LA and different communities. We just have to keep, yeah, fighting, raising money. We have to keep speaking truth to power and to not allow the gaslighting, because we have been surviving. The fact that world ending events have happened, especially for Native Americans, for African Americans, and yet we're still here,
Mm-hmm.
shows that it is possible to live beyond the apocalypse. So we already know that the blueprint is there. I think we just have to believe it, just keep believing it in the face of the white supremacy that we're seeing. And we have to take concrete actions. We also have to support each other, love one another, and create those social spaces so that we don't get exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
Because it should also be about, I talk about the dinner parties, the after parties. Like we have to sustain one another and
Mm-hmm.
nourish one another, as opposed to a lot of infighting that I'm unfortunately seeing.
Yes. Thank you so much for saying that, because our community has always been important. We're a
Hmm.
communal people, just historically it's in our DNA to be
Mhm.
communal, but we had gotten away from that in many
Yeah.
instances. And there's no time like the present to really begin to do more of that, to figure out how we can come together. We didn't get into this, but I mean, just thinking about, people talking about eggs are expensive and all that kind of stuff. So what could you potentially do, to have chickens, or, what can you do, in terms of, growing your own food and harvesting your
Mhm.
own crops, and, being able to share, or community gardens, all these
Yes.
different sorts of things that can help us just in real time. So yeah, it's important that we have these conversations and that we come together in our local communities as well, and begin to come up with solutions. So I love this. Thank you so much, Tao.
Yeah. Thank you. Because, yeah, I feel people are like, how do you get it all done? But I just feel that I do it by actually just helping others instead of
Mhm,
like looking at the self and a sense of crisis. Like, if we each could help each other, then we would all be okay.
mhm.
So I don't know. That's how I deal with crisis.
Yes, yes. So I
To turn
know.
outward.
Yes, yes, it definitely helps. Now I know you are a new mama and you're on maternity leave and all of that. Are you doing any events, either virtual or in person anytime soon, that people can kind of tap into?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely check out my different social media
Hmm.
um, pages. But if you go to taoleiggoff.com/speaking, you'll see
Hmm.
where we're going to be. So we've got this whole European tour coming up in the UK, which is where I was born. So it's going to be exciting to celebrate with family, and for my dragon baby to meet his family. So yeah, lots of celebration, different cooking events. So yeah, I think reach out. Things are very busy right now, but I promise I will get back to folks. And we need to continue to build and start new movements, because those on the right, those who are fascist, are very organized. So we just have to, yeah,
Hmm.
keep it up with our strategies, and keep fighting.
Right. Thank you so much for that. And please, 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 I'm going to give a shout out for Dark Laboratory again. Everybody, please go and grab a copy from your favorite bookseller. And also, you can pick up a copy at the Brown Girl Collective Bookstore. And that's just it, browngirlcollectivebookstore.com. It is affiliated with Bookshop. So if you shop
Mm,
on Bookshop or would like to start shopping on Bookshop, that is a place where you can find this book, as well as all of the books, the majority of the books of authors that I talk to, unless for some reason they just don't have it on there. But yes, that's another spot for you to be able to get a copy of Dark Laboratory and really, really dive into all of the different things that we didn't even have, the bandwidth or time to talk about this evening. So again, Tao, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for taking time out of your busy life to be here and to have this conversation. As I said at the top, I hope that people will not only purchase the book, but tell your libraries to get it, all that good stuff,
yeah,
and share it with
libraries.
friends. Yes, yes, absolutely. Oh, you are so welcome, Laura. Thank you so much for joining in, and
Thank you,
everyone else is
Laura.
here. Whether you left a comment or not, thank you so much for being here. So, and well, I'll let you get some water. I'm just going to say goodnight to everybody else. But thanks again, Tal, for being here. But don't hang up, because I
Okay.
do want to come say goodnight to you. Okay.
All
All
right.
right.
Good night, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Yes, that was such a wonderful conversation. I am glad that when I heard about the book, I'm like, yes, we need to have her on here, because even though this show is called Live Well, Sister, a lot of times we talk about, health stuff, or, good breathing techniques, or whatever the case may be. Hey, if the atmosphere around us, if we don't have good air to breathe, then that's a whole thing in and of itself. So all of these aspects of our lives tie together, and that's why this was a very, very important conversation for us to have at this time. So I just want to say good night to everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm working on next week, so I will let you know for sure who's going to be here next week. And, we'll just have another great conversation at 8 o'clock Wednesday, Eastern Standard Time, if you're watching live. And of course, if you're catching a replay, it's whenever it's convenient for you. So thanks again for being here. And I look forward to chatting with you again real soon. Please continue to take good care of yourselves and live well. Have a good one. Bye-bye.